This video, we're going to be deploying an Azure cluster using ACM, or the Advanced Cluster Manager component, if you will, of Red Hat OpenShift. Now, I've already got ACM installed. I deployed it using ArgoCD. So if you're familiar with the ArgoCD video, what I've done here is I built a new operator right here, ACM base, and in there is all the configuration that I used to deploy ACM. So ACM is configured. So ACM, you can see, is currently installed and configured. Okay, so let's go take a look at ACM. We can go there from the 9-dot menu, go to ACM right here. And now we're there, and we go to clusters. We should see our VMware cluster, sure enough. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin our setup for the deployment of this cluster. Now, the first thing is we need to store our credentials somewhere. So there's two ways really to do this. When I go to deploy the credentials, a lot of times I will create a namespace and then store the credentials in that namespace in OpenShift. The value of doing that is if I destroy the cluster, then those specific credentials are also destroyed. Now, if you don't want to do that, if you want to store your credentials elsewhere, then put it in a different namespace. You can still target those later. So we'll create the namespace. Let's go back to OCP and projects and create a project, and we'll just call it Blue Wagon. Demo Azure namespace. All right, so now we've got this namespace created, and this is where we're going to store our credentials. So let's go to credentials, add credentials. Oh, and one quick note here is I'm using Chrome as the web browser. I typically use Safari. I do prefer to use Safari, but it doesn't work very well with ACM, so use Chrome. All right, Azure, credential name, whatever you want to name it. Let's say, is that... Yeah, so whatever you want to name it. So we'll say Blue Wagon creds. And then I've got it in that namespace, Blue Wagon. My base domain is in this OCP now resource group. So I've already put a domain here, and I did actually migrate the DNS name servers to Azure for this. You don't have to do that. There's a previous video I did on doing IPI install and having external DNS. You can follow those. But for this case, I went ahead and migrated OCPnow.com to the OCP Now resource group. So our base domain is OCPnow.com. Next. And then the resource group, OCP Now RG. Now the client ID and client secret, that's you have to create a service principal. I'll put the link below on how to create the service principal. I'm using one that I previously created, so I'm not going to recreate a new one, but I will provide the steps on how to do that. You're just creating a service principal, giving it contributor and user administration privileges. And let me see, I have that off screen. Let me grab that info. So my client ID and my password. And then of course I'll need my subscription ID. And my tenant ID. There we go. Okay, now my pool secret, which I also have off screen, as well as our private key, and for both the private key and the public key, so we can SSH into our environment. Okay, so that's all in there. Click next. So all of our information for our credentials have been stored. Click add. And there we go. So we have our credentials stored in our Blue Wagon namespace. We can come back here into Blue Wagon, and then we'll find the secret, and then here, Blue Wagon creds are stored right there. Okay, so now that that's done, let's go ahead and go back to ACM, wherever it is. Here we go. Look at, okay, so we'll create cluster, pick Azure, and then our infrastructure provided credentials. Again, that's our Blue Wagon creds, select that. Next, cluster name. Forewarned here, you can't say OpenShift is your cluster name. So I'm just doing Blue Wagon. Cluster set, we're not doing a cluster set in this deployment, but if you were going to, you can select that. I'll save that for a future demo. Base domain OCP now, release image, we'll take the latest one. Next, this is the master node pool, and East, US, and then you can specify the size of your in your environment. I'm not changing any of these defaults here. Again, you can also do the same thing with your worker nodes, specify the size and node counts. And if you want a separate pool, let's say you want to go ahead and configure your infra pool, you can do that here. OpenShift SDN is the default networking type. You can also select OVN Kubernetes. And here's your networking customizations. Feel free to make modifications to this as necessary for your particular use case. Click Next. I'm not doing any Ansible template jobs after that, so we're all done. So I've got all the basics here to get everything installed. We'll click Create. And there we go. So it's going to start creating our cluster. Now what you might see, and I've seen this happen before, it'll come up and it'll say failed right here. Don't panic, just give it a few seconds and it'll go back into this, this moving sprite here. You can also follow the logs. It's a good idea to do that, and it'll show you that it's still actually building components, and it'll come back into a progressing state as soon as it goes through those initial checks. Again, it might say failing, ignore it, let it continue. Let's view logs here. We can do that because it's spinning up a build container. The build container is actually running the OpenShift installer command. So you'll see that pull out here eventually. Oh, still creating the container. So this will take a couple of minutes. But yeah, so definitely follow the logs. So again, you know, this is a basic install, so this is going to take 30, 45 minutes to get deployed over here on Azure. We shouldn't have anything yet, because it's still spinning up the container. So feel free to monitor this while your install is progressing, and it'll show you that it's working. And then so we'll give this a little bit of time, and I'll come back and we'll take a look at what it's done as part of the build environment. Yeah, see, you couldn't find the installer, and here it might say that it failed. Hasn't yet, because it's got to pull it down, right? So that's all part of the process. So just let it run, and things will fall into place just fine. Take a look at that container. Here we go. Oh yeah, see, it's bootstrapping is complete. So that's great. So it found the API. Again, this just spins up a OpenShift installer container. All right, and we're still progressing. Let's take a look at it over here. Refresh. There's our Blue Wagon resource group, and there's Bootstrap masters. So we're still waiting on the worker nodes to be provisioned. Things are moving along pretty well. Okay, I'll be right back. That the install is done. We'll refresh this. And sure, we've got the worker nodes now, so everything's provisioned over there. We have our API access, our console access, and our kube admin and password right there. And it's pending import, so I built it, and now it's going to import it into ACM. That usually doesn't take very long. There we go. So now everything is ready. Let's take a look at the container. Oh, everything's been loaded. Bootstrap's destroyed. That's great. Okay. And yeah, because it's still importing stuff. Okay, if we take a look at our clusters, we see we have 2 clusters now. Here's the VMware cluster that we had locally installed with ACM, and here's our Azure cluster. And eventually this will populate and show our master and worker nodes, and here's the worker node machine set. So if we need to do any scaling, we can use that. I don't have any add-ons, so there's not really going to be anything added here beyond the default stuff. So this will still get popular. It'll take a little while. And then let's grab our kube admin password. We'll jump into the console. And kube admin, paste, login. And there we go. There's our Azure 483 cluster. And we have our managed clusters here. We have our VMware cluster accessible through here. There we go. Okay, so that's pretty much it. We've got 2 clusters, one deployed locally used on VMware, and one deployed using ACM to Azure. And next steps, we'll start playing around with ACM, and hopefully I can capture some more videos as I start to explore multi-cluster management a little bit more. Anyway, that's it for this video. Again, thanks very much for watching. I do appreciate it. Like, subscribe, leave comments below, and have a great day. Thanks.